So first off, I'd like to thank everyone that is taking the time out of their day to participate in today's Design Tips webinar centered around the introduction to MachineBuilder. My name is Jeremy. I'm the education lead here at Vention. Really, my role is to educate users on how to use MachineBuilder, which is Vention's design software, as well as Machine Logic, which is the simulation and programming software used as well. So I'm joined by my colleague, Caroline, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Thanks, Jeremy. So my name is Caroline, and I'm a customer success specialist here. So my role is really to make sure that our customers and users make the most out of our products.
All right, perfect. Thank you. So with that, I can actually jump directly into what we'll be covering today. So in today's webinar, we have three main goals. So the first is really just to do a little bit of the 3D design platform discovery. So for those of you that are new, just showcase a little bit how MachineBuilder works, a little bit of the UI, etc. Then from there, we'll actually go into designing with MachineBuilder. So showing how it works as a design software and how it differentiates itself from the other CAD design softwares out there. And finally, finishing off with some of the basic features that, again, that are unique to MachineBuilder and make it one of the easiest and most intuitive design softwares out there. So throughout the presentation, there are a few different ways that you can actually interact. The first is in the Q&A section of the Zoom platform. So if you would like to, you can ask a question there. Caroline will be monitoring this and will either answer it directly in the Q&A section, or if it's a question that is quite relevant, I will actually say it out loud and answer it live in the webinar itself. Otherwise, you have the chat section where you can chat with other participants, or again, myself or Caroline that will be monitoring the section. Finally, at the end, we will unmute everyone's mic to give them a chance to ask questions both to myself or other participants as well. So with that, I'm going to actually jump directly into the presentation itself to see what we will be doing. So the first thing I'd like to showcase is the dashboard of Vention's platform. So before even getting to design, this is where you'll find, this is the hub of Vention portal. So this is where you'll find everything related to Vention to yourself as well as your team. On the left side over here, you can find some of your designs that you've been working on, as well as maybe other orders that you have placed or your team has placed. In the center, in the notification section, this is where you'll find some relevant information about maybe new releases that Vention has been working on, either hardware or software, as well as information on activities that your team has been working on. And finally, in the top right over here is where you'll find your team. In my case, I'm part of the Vention team. So it showcases the members as well as some of their rights and usability. So in this case, you can say add collaborators or collaborate on other projects with your team, as well as maybe add your purchasing department if there are other people that will be purchasing the designs itself. So that to actually get started in MachineBuilder and to get access to your very first design, all you have to do in the top right corner is click on Create New Design. So this button is available throughout the entire Vention website. All you have to do is click on it and a new window will appear. So over here, this is the design properties window where you can fill out some of the basic information you plan on using for your design, such as the design name, the application category, a brief description that I would highly recommend filling out as it does help you organize your designs later on, as well as the ability to add other collaborators. So a collaborator will either be able to edit and modify the design itself, or maybe just act as a viewer, say if you're sharing it with an internal client, an external client, or just an internal stakeholder. Once you're done filling out this information, you click on Start Designing to actually gain access to the MachineBuilder. In my case, I do already have a design opened up. So for that, I'll actually skip ahead and open up that design. So in today's webinar, the way I'll be teaching you is by showcasing some of the great features that are built into MachineBuilder. And really, as I go through them, I'll be by either say adding missing part, I'll be elaborating on them as they come up. For the design that we'll be working on today, or I'll be showcasing today, is a CNC machine tending application. So we have a CNC over here with a range extender that later I will be adding a robot onto, part presenters, and then finishing off with a safety enclosure around. You'll notice that in part of the safety enclosure and on the part presenters, there are a few things missing, and this is all be showcasing how MachineBuilder works as a design software. So the first thing that I want to get started with is familiarizing ourselves with MachineBuilder interface. So the biggest thing that you'll be using throughout your design experience with MachineBuilder is the top toolbar over here, or the top ribbon. So it does feature some important information about the design, as well as some very useful tools that, again, like I said earlier, that we will be covering a little bit later. So the first thing I'll be starting off with is on the left where the design name is located. So you can actually edit the design name throughout your designing process. But if you'd like to gain access to a few extra things, the drop-down menu, you do have the ability to say, see previous revisions of your design. The way this works is similar to, say, Google Docs or Apple's Time Machine. Every time you save your design, it does not delete the previous version. It actually creates a new version. So you can always backtrack to see what has been worked on and how it looked in the past. Or again, if you'd like to say, if you worked down a previous avenue and you want to go back to a previous version to restart, you can always do that as well. Other things that you can do over here are download the assembly instructions, as well as the bill of materials that does get updated live as you design throughout. On the right side over here, you have a few extra toolbars as well. So you have the price of your design that does get updated live as you work through the design process. I will be showcasing how this works as well. And then you have the cart icon. So the way that this Vention platform works is very similar to any other e-commerce site in that you can check out design very easily. Otherwise, you have the share icon in the top right. So clicking on this allows you to add other collaborators to your design. So again, as earlier shown, you could add a collaborator at the very beginning of a design process, or as you're working through it, if there are, say, new stakeholders, you can add them throughout the design process as well. Otherwise, you have the ability to also publish designs to the community. Say you're just practicing, working on something you really like to share and get input on. You can publish your design to the community to get feedback from other users of Vention platform and really collaborate with the Vention community as a whole, something that I really would highly recommend doing. Afterwards, you do have the ability to add comments. So really, again, I'm just going through a basic design, basic discovery of Vention's platform. So comments very useful in that you can add a comment if you do collaborate with other users and they are not working at the same time. You can leave a comment and they can also see them as they join in and work on the design themselves. From there, I'm going to be going over to the menu to see some of the very useful settings you can look at. So the first thing that I like to highlight in the settings menu is the Smart Designs feature. So Vention does have quite a few smart designs that you can actually see in a previous webinar that is hosted both on YouTube and on Vention's website. But if you have all these ticked off, I would highly recommend leaving them on for your first few attempts of designing with Vention. It really does help get new users get accustomed to designing with industrial automation equipment, both just standard extrusion profiles as well as the motion components. From there, if you go down to the behavior, you can actually change what the default mouse settings are. So if you're coming from a different CAD software, such as SolidWorks, Creo, AutoCAD, or CATIA, you can actually change it to the default mouse settings from there if they are something that you're a bit more used to. In my case, I leave it at Vention since it's something that I've been using for the last 2.5 years. Once you're happy with the settings, you can close that off. And then I would highly recommend actually looking at the shortcuts that we have. So Vention's design software does have quite a few shortcuts that are similar to standard software out there, such as, say, copy paste using Control-C and Control-V, as well as undo and redo, such as Control-Z and Control-Y. But we do have a few that are unique to Vention design software that I will be highlighting a little bit later on, but if you'd like to discover them, this is where you will find them. The final thing that I'd like to highlight in the menu is actually the ability to export your entire design as a step file. So if you click on CAD file export, it saves your design and exports it as a step file. Very useful if you are a little bit more accustomed to, say, viewing or editing a design in a different software, we really make it as easy to collaborate with other softwares as possible. Then finally, you do have the ability to import parts as well. Say you're designing a special jig around a special part, you can import a part up to 200 megabytes, depending on the type of file you have, into Vention software and actually treat it as a Vention part, say snapping it to a design or even locating it with reference to other hardware as well. Something that does make Vention's software very easy to collaborate with other parts out there. So from that, I did do a basic discovery of the settings, a little bit of the share, and from there we can actually get into the middle section, which is the top toolbar. For now, if there are any questions, you can ask them now before I jump ahead. Great. So from here, I'll jump ahead to the units measurement over here, which is one of the most used or highly important parts of the top toolbar. So Vention's ecosystem is designed around a 45mm increment or some fraction thereof. So if I zoom in a little bit over here, we have the extrusion profiles that are either a 45 by 45mm, zooming into the part presenter, a 45 by 90, and larger ones over here, a 90 by 90 profile. So that in mind, the way Vention's hardware works is all designed around that 45mm increment. So we highly recommend changing this increment over here, which is a snapping increment, to 45mm or 22.5, depending on what type of hardware you're using. If you want to do a little bit more fine-tuned adjustments, you can use the smaller ones, but again, I highly recommend switching back to the 45 or 22.5 after this is done. Again, the snapping increment is something that I will highlight a little bit later, but it's really how Vention's design interface works. So from there, I'll do a little bit of the navigation. So you saw me moving the design around a little bit, but again, I'll go over this. So first, you can actually pan the design around. So if you right click, do note that I am using Vention's controls, so it might be a little bit different if you're using SolidWorks or AutoCAD, but for the Vention ones, you can right click to pan the design around. What this does is simply moves the design space or the camera in the design space, but doesn't actually move the design itself. Otherwise, you can zoom in and zoom out using the scroll wheel and also rotate around. If you click on the scroll wheel itself, it will rotate around the point that you click. Otherwise, you have two other ways you can do this. The first is holding the space bar and left clicking to drag around, or clicking on the navigation cube in the bottom left-hand corner. So this is where I'll actually bring in one of the very first shortcuts, which is the shortcuts R and F. The first one, R, what it does is it recenters the design in the design space based on the initial view, and F full screens everything that you have in the design onto the screen itself. So very useful. I'll do this once again. If, say, I were working on the bottom of my range extender that I have over here, maybe adding an extra foot, and rather than trying to navigate around to get the proper view again, simply click R and F, and it snaps it to this view over here. This is, I'd say, the second most used combination of shortcuts in Vention's MachineBuilder. From there, one other very useful navigation tool is the exploded view over here. So again, this is a bit more useful when you have already purchased your design and are looking to assemble it on the floor. And what it does really gives you a view of the smaller internal components of everything if you are looking to assemble like that. To close the exploded view, simply click on the bomb icon again. So from there, that does a lot of the basic navigation and, say, the moving around of Vention's MachineBuilder, and we can actually get into the designing portion itself to show how easy it is to use. So zooming in over here, I'm going to highlight what we're looking to do. So I notice on my enclosure, I am missing some of the top bracing, and looking at the other corner, missing some of the gusseting and plating as well to actually make this a sound structure. So here is where I'll talk about how Vention's software works. On the parts library on the left, where you'll find Vention's 1,000+ modular parts that you can design with, you can select the extrusion profile that you're looking to use. So in my case, I'm looking to continue using the same profile, which is a 45 by 45 millimeter extrusion. So I can select it from the menu on the left. To bring in extrusion, there are a few different ways that you can do this, but Vention has made it very easy to do. So as opposed to a standard design software where you have to say, import a part, drop it into the space, select the surfaces, mate them, making sure that all the faces are coincident and they're not interfering with one another. All this is done for you using the snapping increment that I talked about earlier. So in my case, if I bring in a part and I've set the increment to 45 millimeters, the part, if it can actually attach in real life, will attempt to attach every 45 millimeter increment. So that I'll show you how easy it is to do using the extrusion profile. So in my case, I do know the length over here has to be 1170. So I can use the drop-down menu over here, scroll down to the length that I'm looking for and select it. But there are a few different ways you can do this that I will highlight later on. So dragging it over, you'll notice that it will attempt to snap to various locations. This means that this extrusion profile can actually be attached in this orientation. But what I'm looking for is the one on the left side. So I simply drag my mouse over, hover it over, and it'll try to snap to the most likely orientation. If you notice, the navigation compass does appear, and I can use the left and right arrow keys to actually cycle through the various orientations that I can place them in. If you're happy with the orientation, you can click the green arrow to confirm. Let me see, I do notice there is a question over here. Vention interface with a 3D mouse from 3D Connection. So this is a great question that we get actually asked quite a bit about navigation and using a 3D mouse. So at the moment, Vention does only offer the ability or support standard mouse or, in some cases, some trackpads. But a 3D mouse has been something that has been frequently requested and actually is on the roadmap to look into. So I do thank you for that great question. So from there, moving on to the next portion, we'll be looking at one of the most used shortcuts in Vention's library, which is the ability to reinsert the last click part. So looking over here, I do notice that I'm missing two plates. I'm missing the 1x5 and a T plate over here. So I can scroll through my Vention library find the part that I'm looking for, in this case, a 1x5 plate, click it and drag it into the design. Inversely, the other way that I can use is the letter I or the insert key on your keyboard. What this does is it reinserts the last click part and attaches it to your cursor. So if I've clicked the 1x5 plate and press insert, it snaps it to the end of my cursor. So it's very good if you're using the same type of part over and over and over again. For example, if you're designing an enclosure and using a 45 by 45 millimeter extrusion multiple times, pressing I does really speed up the design process. You don't have to re-import a part each and every time. So with this, I can press I to reinsert the last part, confirm the location. Again, since it gave the most likely orientation first, I don't have to cycle through quite a few of them. And then do the same for the T-plate. So selecting the T-plate, pressing I, then reinsert it and snap to the location. Again, you've noticed there are 19 different orientations, and you can cycle through them to see if there is one that you're more likely to use. Like I said, it does try to propose the most likely one first, but sometimes that's not always the case. To confirm, again, simply click on the green arrow. Now zooming out, let's see if there's anything else missing on my enclosure. So going around, it seems like at the base here, I am missing one of the mounting feet. So again, rather I can use the I button to reinsert the last part, but just to do a bit more of the discovery of the parts library, I'll go back over here to the parts library and click on the structural or the part frame accessories over here. So it goes to show that Vention does have quite a few different parts to use, and I would highly recommend going through the parts library to see what applications are possible for your own projects. So we have drawer slides over here, heavy duty and door hinges, some special frame accessories, as well as the leveling and floor mounts. So over here, as I mentioned earlier in the top right corner, you do have the price of your design. And the way Vention works, the price actually gets updated live as you go through the design process. So say I have this leveling foot. Looking over here, it has a cost associated of about $35, and my current price rests at $36,788. If I attach the leveling foot or the floor mount over here, notice that it updates to $36,827. So Vention is very transparent in the price of our hardware. So as you design, you'll see that the price does go up accordingly with what you have in the design. Every time you delete something, the price drops, and every time you add something, the price does go up. So as you saw there are, say, theoretically multiple different orientations that this foot can be mounted on, but really the most likely is at the end of the extrusion facing down. And it really only gives you those options because that is the one that will most likely be used. So that I can snap on the floor mount and look at the rest of the enclosure. Notice that I'd say I'm quite happy with it. So after this, it looks like I want to finish off the part presenters. Like I said earlier, I need to change the extrusion over here since it's not long enough. I'm missing an extrusion over here, as well as missing an additional gusset. So I can simply zoom in and start designing over here, but sometimes the enclosure on the outside will get in the way of my designing process. So this is where two other shortcuts come into play, which is the ability to hide or isolate separate parts. So for this, we have two different shortcuts. The first is Control H, when what that does is it hides every part that you have selected. So for example, say I'd like to select the end of my enclosure over here, and the selection window or the drag and drop window functions the exact same as other design softwares. If you go from left to right, it highlights everything that's inside the window. And if you go from right to left, it highlights everything that the window is touching. So say, for example, again, I want to hide the corner over here. I select it, then press Control H to hide it from view. Again, it does not actually delete it from the design itself. If you notice, the part or the price does not change. It simply hides it from view, which gives you access to designing on maybe some smaller parts like what we're trying to do. If you like to bring everything back into view, you can press Control-Shift-H to bring it all back. Now, the other shortcut that I like to highlight is the ability to isolate parts. So rather than hiding everything that you've selected, you can actually hide everything except what you've selected. So say, for example, I want to continue working on just these two carts over here. By pressing Control-J, it hides everything except those two part presenters. Makes it a lot easier to work on them. And once I'm finished on them, I can bring everything back into view to see them. And over there. So looking over here, let's see what we have left to do. So notice first, I need to lengthen out this extrusion profile to make sure it reaches the entire end and add an additional gusset. So earlier you saw me bring in an extrusion profile. So in this case, I can say measure the internal dimensions, delete the extrusion, bring the new one. However, we do have a feature that is very easy to use for Vention's aluminum extrusion profiles, which is actually the ability to resize them directly within the CAD. There's no need to say edit a parameter or a separate menu. All you have to do is select the extrusion itself and click on the resize extrusion in the navigation compass. You can also do this by right-clicking and selecting extrusion, or using the shortcut letter L. So by clicking L, it gives you the available options to resize. So with that, I can then drag it out. And you'll notice that it does jump in that 45mm increment that I did mention earlier. So dragging this out, even if I say dragged it out a little bit too long and confirm, as easy as pressing L again and resizing it to the proper length. So from there, looking back, I notice that I've resized this to the proper length, but I am missing a gusset. Again, I can go down to the parts library, select it, but using the shortcut letter I does make it a lot faster. When you're reinserting, say, a single part, yes, sometimes you can use the parts library. Once you get accustomed to designing, using the insert feature does make your design process a lot faster. So going over to the secondary part presenter, since I'm finishing the first one, I notice that I'm missing the bar entirely. Again, I can go up here, select the appropriate profile and resize it. But since I already have one that is the correct size, I'll simply select it and press I to reinsert it or attach it to my cursor. Now looking over here, I'll try to attach it, but I notice that it does not want to snap directly in between the two gussets. The reason being is that this part presenter, at least the central bracing, was designed using that 22.5mm increment. So if I really want to get it in place, what I can do is simply drop it in the general location that I'm looking for, confirm the placement, then go to the snapping increment and change it to 22.5. So you can do this first, so then snap it directly, or using Vention's degrees of freedom, you can actually attach a part first and then actually slide it over. If a part is, say, attached on an aluminum extrusion profile, you can slide it in a linear path, or say you have a hinge or other rotational degrees of freedom, you can actually also rotate as well, which is something that I'll showcase in just a moment. So with that, this is why using the 22.5 or the 45mm is the most recommended increment to design with. So zooming back out, it looks like that this part presenter is complete. So this, I can press R and F to bring the entire design back on, to center it, and then press Control-Shift-H to bring the entire design back on screen. So from here, before I go a little bit deeper into that degrees of freedom, I want to finish up my design itself. So looking over here, it seems like I'm missing the CNC that the robot will be tending and the actual robot itself. So go back to the parts library, look at the robots, and click on the plate. It looks like I have the UR10 and the UR16E mounting plate. Standard for machine tending, I'll probably opt for the slightly longer UR10E. Click on the robot, allows me to snap it again directly to the mounting plate. Let's get the angle correct over here. And then cycling through the various orientations, I can attach it. And with that, so if you see over here, the price did jump substantially. And the reason being is Vention actually does have the ability to offer the robots directly on our platform. So we're one of the very few companies that is able to offer digitally robots. So we include the Doosan H-Series, the FANUC, as well as Universal Robots. So from there, I have the robot attached to my linear actuator, and I need the CNC over here just to finish my layout. So found under public models, Vention does offer quite a few environmental models to help you, say, design around a specific size. Say if you're looking to do a range extender for CNC, we have quite a few different models of your basic CNCs. So that I can then drop it into space. Looking over here, it's not the correct location, so I'll do a right view, select it, and then modify its location using the move and rotate. Drag it over to the correct location. That essentially I've finished up the design itself. Now, the last thing I'd like to showcase, as I touched on earlier, are the degrees of freedom. So like I showed, you can, say, slide an extrusion along a profile, or if you have a angular degree of freedom, such as a door, you can actually cycle through the various degrees of freedom using the arrow keys on screen or using the arrow keys on your keyboard, and actually showcase, say, what it's like to, say, open or close one of the doors, or even move the gantry plate on the actuator itself. One of the great things is this does not stop there. You can actually edit the robot directly in the CAD, say both good for a reach study to make sure, say, the part presenters are close enough, if it's close enough to your CNC, if maybe you need a slightly larger or robot or a larger range extender. So that I've come to the end of my designing portion. One great thing that I would highly recommend and say you are almost ready to purchase, but want to have a second set of eyes, someone that is very used to using the software to double check to make sure you're not missing any additional hardware, say a plate here and there, you can actually request a design of you directly within the software itself. So what you do is you click on Request Design Help, fill out the general information, and this will actually get sent out to a Vention representative that will contact you if you're missing any information. If not, the project gets sent directly to one of our application engineers that will do a brief overview to make sure you have all of the required hardware and software and send any feedback to yourself. And with that, we've actually covered a lot of what I wanted to show in today's webinar. I do know I did show quite a bit, but at this moment, I will actually open the floor if you have any questions, maybe about the design software, some of the capabilities, or other projects you can actually do using Vention design software.